Number 1.
It was just 11 days before Christmas in 2000. Jacqueline Markham, called Jackie by her friends and family, was excited to make a trip to Tampa. Her children lived there, and she would be celebrating an early Christmas with them and celebrating her grandsons' birthdays. It was something she had been looking forward to for weeks. But on the day she was supposed to make the trip, her family instead got a phone call that she was gone. More than 18 years later, 3 boxes sit in Detective Mark Murdoch's office at the Nassau County Sheriff's Office. The boxes are full of pictures and interviews, but no answers about what happened to 51-year-old Jackie Markham on that cold December day. When Nassau County deputies arrived at Jackie Markham's home, it seemed everything was in place. No signs of a struggle, no blood in the home, and her car was still in the garage. She had last been seen at Eckerd's Pharmacy at the Winn-Dixie Shopping Center in Callahan the night before. Her bag from the drugstore was still on the front seat of her car. It is literally like she just got and walked away or was taken away, det. Murdoch said. Investigators leaned toward the latter. Jackie Markham lived a normal, stable life, loved her children and grandchildren deeply, and was known as a reliable worker at her job Cheetah Transportation. She loved her job, she worked, she was never a no-call, no-show at work, det. Murdoch said. So when her daughter, Melissa, and son-in-law Todd Myrick got a call from Jackie's job that she didn't show up and no one could reach her, they knew something was wrong. All 3 of Jackie's children immediately traveled to Callahan, and after meeting with deputies at her home, they began driving around looking for any sign of her. Doing things that no family should ever have to do, Todd Myrick said. Like looking in dumpsters and looking in garbage bags on the side of the road. I don't think we slept at all that first night. We went around everywhere. Jackie's purse was found along the side of Evergreen Avenue in Jacksonville. Just blocks away from where a man named Ross Lane Emerson was staying. Emerson was immediately a suspect. He was charged in the death of 2 other people in Florida. One of which was a 33-year-old woman from Yulee. He was also a suspect in the death of a 3rd person in Georgia. Murdoch said detectives questioned Emerson on several occasions, and though he would talk about other killings, Murdoch said Emerson consistently denied having anything to do with Jackie's disappearance. Emerson eventually took his own life in prison in 2001. Though Emerson made for an interesting suspect, det. Murdoch doesn't believe it was him. Besides the repeated denials, the one thing that stands out in his mind is that nothing was out of place in Jackie's home. No signs of a struggle. He firmly believes she knew her attacker. She went either willingly with someone or someone she knew. She wasn't taken, I believe, by someone she didn't know, det. Murdoch said. Not without putting up a fight. Another person detectives looked at was a man named Archie Carroll. Archie Carroll is the boyfriend and considered a suspect because he was the boyfriend, det. Murdoch said. He wanted more, but Jackie didn't. Carroll was the person that first reported Jackie as missing. He told investigators Jackie called him to say a man named Richard had shown up to her house drunk. 5 days after Jackie went missing back in 2000, Carroll spoke to a First Coast news crew that was covering the story. I think this is someone that liked her and wanted her company, and maybe by the fact that she went with him, it was a come-on cue or something, and maybe he tried something and maybe it went negative, it went violent, Carroll said. That is really my gut feeling on it. The story of the phone call and a man coming to Jackie's home is something det. Murdoch says investigators have doubts about. Myrick and Jackie's children also believe the story seems far-fetched. Knowing a perfectionist is probably not planning on having a date the night before she is going out of town for a week and hasn't finished decorating her Christmas tree, Myrick said. So a lot of things didn't, quite add up in our minds. We did reach out to Archie Carroll for this story. He left Unsolved's Katie Jeffries a voicemail saying he spoke to a lawyer years ago who told him to no longer comment. But he did go on to talk briefly about that night Jackie went missing. I am sorry, I have nothing to tell you, Carroll said. I went to see her and help her, she sounded like she was in trouble. I got there and she was gone. End of story. I have never seen or heard from her again. I want it solved like everybody else. God, I do. I want everyone to know I had nothing to do with it. It is important to note, Archie Carroll has never been charged in Jackie's disappearance and maintains his innocence. Though Jackie is still listed as a missing persons case, her family believes she was murdered, and on top of their grief of losing her, Myrick said her family doesn't even have her body to bury. Nowhere they can go to honor her life. We can't put flowers on anything, Myrick said. You know, we can't go sit and remember her in any place we feel that there is a connection to. But detectives at the Nassau County Sheriff's Office are not giving up. They want to bring Jackie's children answers about what happened to their loving mother that night, and they know the answer is out there. Somebody out there knows, somebody out there has knowledge, Det. Murdoch said. Somebody knows. If you know anything about the disappearance of Jackie Markham in December of 2000, please call the Nassau County Sheriff's Office at 904-225-5174.
Number 2.
42-year-old Patricia Viola was last seen in Bogota, New Jersey on February 13, 2001. She disappeared from her house without a trace the day before Valentine's Day. Patricia Viola was born on August 18, 1958, to parents Lucille and John Mary. She married her husband James Viola in 1986. They have a daughter and son together. The family lived in a residence on Chestnut Avenue in Bogota, New Jersey. Viola was a stay-at-home mother. At the time of her disappearance, Viola suffered from epilepsy and couldn't drive because she had suffered a recent bout of seizures. On February 13, 2001, Viola left home around 8:30 a.m. to spend some time volunteering at the Eroy Bixby School Library, located 2 blocks from her home. Her husband left for work that morning, and her 2 kids were attending school. After leaving the library around 11:30 a.m., Viola returned home and picked up a phone message her mother had left her at 12:30 p.m. The home security system log showed that the house's alarm was reset around 1:10 p.m. Viola was nowhere to be seen when her husband returned around 4:30 p.m., and she has not been heard from again. At first her husband thought she had grabbed some money and went shopping for a gift at the nearby mall since it was the day before Valentine's Day. But when she didn't return that evening he knew something was wrong and filed a missing persons report to the Bogota Police Department. Patricia left her epilepsy medication, purse, money, cell phone and her keys at home. Detectives searched the area with helicopters, boats and dogs, but no trace of Patricia was found. Her husband canvassed the neighborhood with flyers, but to no avail. On July 27, 2002, skeletal remains of a left foot were discovered by a beachgoer on Rockaway Beach off 123rd Street, Queens. The beach was located about 33 miles from Viola's home. It was found alongside a shoe and sock that had washed up on the beach. DNA samples were taken, and the remains were later buried on Hart Island in 2005. In 2009, New York sent the DNA sample to the CODIS, Combined DNA Index System, lab in West Texas. On September 12, 2012, the remains were positively identified as belonging to Patricia Viola by the New York City Medical Examiner's Office. The cause of death is still unknown. On February 25, 2013, Patricia Viola was buried in Hackensack Cemetery, New Jersey. Foul play is strongly suspected in Patricia Viola's disappearance, and authorities still consider her death an open case. The circumstances of Patricia Viola's disappearance remain unclear and is classified as a homicide. Her case remains unsolved. In 2008, Patricia's law went into effect in New Jersey, which enforces police officers to accept missing person reports immediately and begin investigating. If the person is still missing after 30 days, DNA samples should be secured from the family and entered into national databases. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Patricia Viola, please contact the Bogota Police Department at 201-487-2400.
Number 3.
Amy St. Laurent was last seen on the night of October 20, 2001, after going out with her friend to a local pool hall and dance club, but never returned home. Saturday night, October 20, 2001, Amy went out with a friend Eric Rubright, who was visiting from Florida. They went to the Old Port. She had called her mother between 10:30 p.m. and told her she was on her way to Portland from her house in South Berwick. During the call she also invited her mum for drinks with them, but she had already gotten into her pajamas. That evening, the two went to a pool hall, bought pizza, and their last stop was the Pavilion Dance Club. While at the club they met two men, and they were dancing together. Eric went to the bathroom around 1 a.m., and when he came back, Amy was gone. Eric left the club and stood outside until around 1:20 a.m., but he couldn't find Amy, so he then went to the car, and inside was Amy's cell phone, coat, purse, and backpack. This meant that all Amy had on her were her driver's license and some cash. Eric then drove around the block, looking for Amy, but didn't see her, so eventually, he gave up and figured she had left with the two men and would find her own way home. He then drove back to Amy's house, and the next morning when he woke up in the car, because he didn't feel comfortable sleeping at her house, when she wasn't around, Amy still hadn't returned. He used a spare key she had given him to go inside the house and had a shower. He left Amy's purse and backpack inside her house. He left her coat on the hood of her car and a note on her door asking what had happened and thank you for the visit. He left her house keys on the tire of her car and then left. Amy had left with two men she had met on the night out and went to an apartment on Brighton Avenue for a birthday party, which was out of character of Amy. Her friends and family were immediately concerned when no one had heard from her the following day. Then Amy did not show up for work the following Monday, which made them extremely worried. Eric Rubright's story was questioned by authorities, so he agreed to have his car searched and submitted a polygraph test. One of the first tips investigators received was of a man named Jeffrey Russ Gorman, a 21-year-old man who lived with his two roommates. Jeffrey told the detectives that he and his two roommates met Amy on Saturday night and had invited her to a party back at his apartment, but only his two roommates showed up. He then told detectives that he drove Amy back home and was back at his own apartment at 2 a.m. However, when the two roommates were questioned, they gave investigators a different story. One of the roommates said he had arrived back at their apartment at 3 a.m. and Jeffrey was nowhere to be found. He then woke up around 5 a.m. to find Jeffrey cleaning in the bathroom. Investigators then found out that Jeffrey had been pulled over at 3:14 a.m. on the night of Amy St. Laurent's disappearance. This was over an hour after he had told detectives. Air, ground, and water searches for Amy went on for 2 months. On December 8, 2001, authorities found Amy's body buried in a shallow grave in the woods off Route 22 in Scarborough, near Jeffrey's mother's home. She had been beaten, her body showed signs of sexual assault, and she had been shot. Her autopsy also showed signs of GHB, one of the date rape drugs, in her system. Her body had been left in the woods for a number of days until her killer returned to bury her. On a 22-minute phone call Jeffrey had to his mother, he admitted to murdering Amy as well as giving details of the crime. Jeffrey Gorman was sentenced to 60 years in prison for the murder of Amy St. Laurent. The trial took place in 2003 and lasted a week long. His mother had testified to his admission.
Number 4.
16-year-old Margarette Ann Cuauhtli was last seen at her home in Arlington, Texas on the morning of October 11, 2001. On the morning of October 11, 2001, Margarette was at her family's residence, located in the 7600 block of Port Phillip Drive, near the southeast campus of Tarrant County Community College. Margarette, a 16-year-old student at Sam Houston High School, was reported missing by her adoptive father Gabriel Emilio Cuauhtli. In the runaway report filed on October 12, Gabriel told investigators that his daughter had voluntarily run off with her boyfriend the previous morning. Margarette's father Gabriel claimed that she was abducted by the Mexican mafia and sold into prostitution. He said men with shaved heads showed up at their home demanding ransom money for her release. He also claimed that he received several emails from Margarette after she disappeared, dated between October of 2001 and February 2002. The emails were sent to some of her friends and family, claiming she was being held against her will in Mexico and forced into prostitution. A photo of Margarette and another girl in front of a church in Mexico was attached to one of her emails. The image was analyzed by officials and determined to be fraudulent, and the emails were traced back to Gabriel's office computer at Chase Bank on East Border Street, where he worked as a fraud investigator. Police believe he wrote the emails and fabricated evidence in an attempt to lead the investigation in other directions. He was arrested on suspicion of abducting his daughter in April 2002. When he was arrested, he told police Margarette had been abducted by her boyfriend, who then turned her over to the Mexican mafia. In 2004, he was convicted on unrelated embezzlement charges and pleaded guilty to theft and tampering with evidence. As part of his plea agreement, the kidnapping charge was dropped. Margarette's uncle gave authorities a videotaped statement by his niece that was recorded in 2001, which included allegations of abuse against her father. Gabriel claimed that she was lying and maintains his innocence in her disappearance. In 2006, police searched the family's former residence, including under a patio that had been installed a few days after her disappearance, but no trace of Margarette was found. Gabriel Emilio Cuauhtli is currently serving a 20-year sentence for embezzlement charges unrelated to her disappearance. The circumstances regarding Margarette's disappearance remain unclear, and her case was changed from endangered runaway to endangered missing by the end of October 2001. Her case remains unsolved. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Margarette Ann Cuauhtli, please contact the Arlington Police Department at 817-459-5667 or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST, 1-800-843-5678.
Number 5.
Michele Whitaker was last seen on August 16, 2002, at a truck stop in Spartanburg, South Carolina. She disappeared after getting dropped off at the truck stop by a friend and hasn't been seen or heard from since. Michele Shelley Whitaker was last seen alive on August 16, 2002, in Spartanburg, South Carolina at a truck stops of America off I-85. The friend who dropped her off at the truck stop was questioned by police, and after passing a polygraph he was ruled out as a suspect. Michele had recently been arrested for a DUI and had fought with her mother over it. She disappeared after mistakenly being released from jail instead of attending court-ordered treatment for drug and alcohol abuse. According to police, checks on her credit report and social security number showed no activity for years after her disappearance. Investigators were suspicious that Whitaker may have been met with foul play at the truck stop, though they didn't have any evidence to support that theory. A month after Michele disappeared, one of her co-workers, 21-year-old Heather Sellers, went missing. In September of 2002, 21-year-old Sellers, who had worked with Michele Whitaker at the Waffle House, was reported missing. Police immediately focused on her boyfriend Jonathan Vick, who they already suspect is responsible for the 1995 unsolved rape and murder of a local hairdresser named Dana Satterfield. When police discovered the link between Vick and Whitaker, her missing persons case turned into a homicide investigation. Investigators were unable to tie Vick to Whitaker or Sellers' disappearance, but they were able to get a conviction in the Dana Satterfield case. In 2006, he was found guilty in the 1995 murder of Dana Satterfield and remains a suspect in the other two cases. On October 13, 2005, an anonymous letter arrived at the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office. The letter stated that Michele Whitaker had been murdered and that her body was buried near a pond in Landrum, South Carolina. Police conducted a search using cadaver dogs but were unable to find anything. Michele's case went cold, and it wasn't until 6 years after her disappearance that a tip came in that changed everything. In the summer of 2008, a woman was watching an episode of Forensic Files that featured the murder conviction of Jonathan Vick. The program showed a photo of Michele Whitaker, who police believed had been murdered by Vick. The woman was shocked. That photo wasn't of a woman who had been murdered by Vick, it was a photo of her neighbor. She called the police to let them know Whitaker was living in Oregon. In August of 2008, Spartanburg County Sheriff Chuck Wright announced that Michele Whitaker had been found alive and well in Oregon. He did not release Whitaker's current location or reason why she left the area out of concerns for her privacy. Wright said it didn't appear Whitaker knew her disappearance had become the subject of a homicide.
Number 6.
39-year-old Dana Pastori was last seen in New Orleans, Louisiana on February 27, 2002. She disappeared after resigning from her job, telling friends she planned to leave New Orleans and move back to her hometown. Dana Marie Surrette Pastori was born in 1966 in Corpus Christi, Texas to parents Peter Surrette and Frances Sella. Pastori divorced her first husband in Santa Barbara, California. She became estranged from her two daughters by the courts after she had abducted them following Christmas 1995. She told social workers that they suffered poor treatment from her ex-husband's new wife. They moved from Ohio to Mexico, Puerto Rico, Florida, New Orleans and Seattle before the accusation was eventually proven to be false. In the late 1990s, Pastori started an on and off romantic relationship with John Henry Morgan in New Orleans, Louisiana. In November 2000 they moved into a second-floor apartment on 735 Ursulines Street, near the French Quarter. Over the next 2 years, both were employed at Quartermaster Deli, an eatery in the 1100 block of Bourbon Street, located next door to the apartment. Pastori worked as a late-night shift waitress, while Morgan delivered groceries on a bicycle. In March 2002, Pastori resigned from her job at Quartermaster Deli and broke up with her boyfriend. She told a friend that she planned to leave her life in New Orleans behind to move back to her hometown. For the next 3 years, Dana Pastori was never heard from again. Pastori did not get into contact with her children, nor her parents with whom she was estranged. She also hadn't filled a prescription for her medical condition since 2002. Following Dana Pastori's disappearance, Morgan would later tell inconsistent accounts of her whereabouts. 1 week before her disappearance, Pastori was said to have been involved in an automobile accident while visiting a friend and was hospitalized. Morgan told her coworker that Pastori stayed with her mother in Ohio to recuperate from the car accident and was trying to get custody of her two daughters. She would later travel to Prague, Czechoslovakia, and decided to live in Europe as she longed to become a writer. He told another friend that Pastori got a job as a dispatcher with the police and lived with her father in South Carolina. Mummy found in trunk of former boyfriend's house in New Orleans on October 21, 2005, a decomposed mummified body was found by a landlord who was cleaning out debris from an apartment on 939 Elysian Fields Avenue in New Orleans, Louisiana following Hurricane Katrina. The remains were stored in a gray and tan wood trunk in the storage room of the ground floor from the building. In July 2007, the body was positively identified as that of Dana Pastori. Police found identification cards, a passport, divorce records and other documents inside a small locked box in the apartment. The body was clothed in a shirt with a Lake City Police Department logo. Upon interviewing the landlord, police learned that Dana Pastori's former boyfriend, John Henry Morgan, resided in the second-floor apartment of the same building since January 2005 with his then-girlfriend Tracy Greer. Following Hurricane Katrina, Morgan left after receiving a $2,000 relief check from FEMA, leaving behind his property that was in the storage room. On February 8, 2008, Morgan was arrested in Charlotte, North Carolina, where he had evacuated to following Hurricane Katrina. He was charged with second-degree murder in the death of Dana Pastori. Morgan denied killing Pastori. He told police that Pastori was murdered by a drug dealer named Pepper for ratting him out and that he was told to store the body in a wood trunk. The coroner's office determined the cause of death was homicide by strangulation, as evidenced by the curling iron electrical cord found still tangled around the neck of the body. Police believe Pastori was murdered sometime in 2002 at Morgan's former home on 735 Ursulines Street. He then dismembered her body and stored it into the trunk. Morgan kept the body in the trunk for 3 years, moving it from apartment to apartment. On July 29, 2009, John Morgan was convicted in the murder of his former girlfriend, Dana Pastori. The jury deliberated for about 40 minutes before finding Morgan guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.